I'd like to invite Meenu Gupta to initiate this panel, and we'll get going here. We've got quite a few things to cover.
Hi, everyone. Please have a seat. We will get started without any further ado. We have Matt Palmer here from SDN Central, who's going to be leading us in a panel for the next 30 minutes to focus on the build track for the cloud networking, cloud infrastructure section. And he'll be focusing on how to build a virtualized networking infrastructure. With any further ado, back to Matt. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Let's see, can everyone hear me? Oh, there we go. All right, good. Good. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for inviting us for the panel today. My name is Matt Palmer with SDN Central, as introduced, and I do need to admit before I introduce all of our speakers that we were just commiserating about how challenging it is to follow both Alwyn as well as all the dancers. So we have no dancing, and we're not going to give a very high-profile talk. So, but we are going to have a fun panel, and we're going to talk about virtualized network infrastructure. And today we're joined by Mark Cummings, who's the CTO of Orchestral Networks. We're also joined by Treb Ryan from Dimension Data NTT. And we're also joined by Shailesh Rao, Global Director of the Cloud Business Unit over at Google. So we should have an exciting panel today. First, I wanted to share some of the observations that we have over at SDN Central around network virtualization and cloud and how these are tying together. And one of the things that we continually to see and we hear from customers is that they're hearing quite often that they're getting the vendor point of view. And I think one of the things that excites me about this panel today is that it's not just the vendor point of view, because when we look, and particularly with Treb and Shailesh, they both have services that they are delivering today to customers using SDN. And using network virtualization. And so I think we get a point of view that's around from the customer point of view around what that's going to look like. And so from that perspective, our goal is to talk about from network infrastructure, how that's going to solve customer problems. And with that, I'm going to kick it off with a question that we're going to ask each of the panelists. So Mark, we'll start with you. And so I'd love just to hear maybe a brief introduction about you and your company within. Again, there's going to be a 2 minutes for everyone on this. A brief introduction of your company and sort of your view of network virtualization and what it means to the cloud, both from a public, private, and say hybrid perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. So we look at the infrastructure that exists today, and what we see is our classical technology can handle complexity, it can handle scale, it can handle volatility, but only one. But the problem that we face is that we have all of them together. And so we have to find different ways of handling. We've developed technology that's actually based on biology. We looked at how, in evolution, we moved from colonies of single-cell animals to a single multi-cell animal. We look at today's environment, and whether it's moving applications from one cloud to another or trying to operate the network around a cloud efficiently, we have the same problem. There's all these little islands, like little separate cells, and at an operational level, they don't interconnect. Orchestral Networks has patent-pending technology which resolves that problem. We focused first on the network operators, and we've done 3 public demonstrations with large-scale networks, bringing together all the different pieces of the network and showing how we can orchestrate end-to-end.
Great, thanks. Treb.
Yeah, my name's Treb Ryan with Dimension Data. Dimension Data provides both public and private cloud services, so the 4 cents an hour sign up online, as well as an integrated private cloud that runs on the same UI and API as our public cloud. We've been doing this about 4 years, originally under the moniker of OpSource was the company. And OpSource had created, when we created our public cloud offering, we had done quite a bit around orchestrating the underlying Cisco architecture to provide that as an API addressable element, as well as network and as well as the storage and the servers. And not surprising, as Dimension Data and NTT are Cisco's largest partners, that was a big reason why we ended up doing a deal with them. So from day one, we looked at the cloud infrastructure and how we could allow people to use API addressable elements that were not just server and storage, but also integrated the network right out of the gate. We'll talk a little bit about that later.
And
Thanks.
Josh?
Thanks, Treb. My name is Shroud. I work for Google, and I'm responsible for our cloud platform business globally. As I'm assuming most of you know, we are in the business of making, organizing the world's information, making it useful and universally available. And what the cloud platform business for us represents is really nothing but an externalization of what we do internally, right? So over the last 15 years, we've been building this infrastructure that was built, managed, optimized to run our services, right? To run things like Chrome and Android and AdWords and AdSense and G+ and everything else, YouTube. And for the last 3.5 years, we've now made it available to anyone who wants to run their infrastructure, run their application, run their business on us. And the way we look at it is, we're not building a separate infrastructure for customers. We're not building a separate cloud stack, or we're not building a separate platform or infrastructure as a service offering. We're just taking the infrastructure that we've built over the last 15 years to serve our needs, and we believe we run some of the most, if not the most, scalable, highly performant applications known to mankind, at least today. And that platform is what we make available to everybody. So when you asked, Matt, about SDN, for us, I think it's fair to say that we were doing SDN before SDN became a thing for people to do. We just hadn't talked about it. But we look at this as just one of many technologies that helps us become better, faster, cheaper, and provide the kind of benefits that, again, we wanted for ourselves and now being able to offer it to others. So we don't look at SDN as something separate that we do. Now, for example, I don't know how many of you caught our launch of Andromeda recently, which is our NFV SDN offering that's now available to anybody that runs on our platform. So it's just part of our fabric. And that's why we're very excited about, about where this thing can go. And really, thanks a lot for giving me a chance to be on this panel.
No, thank you, and thank you, panelists, for the first set of comments. Trev, I'd like to ask you the first question, as this relates as an operator, particularly as a long time around a cloud infrastructure. What's your view around sort of when you started using network virtualization, and then Then you mentioned Cisco. How do you sort of view the role then of APIs and SDKs in terms of then being able to take that, what you did originally, to integrate into other types of solutions and technologies?
Yeah, and I will make one quick comment, though. It was funny because I forget. I think Shailesh and I think of ourselves as the vendors now. Not as the, once we started selling it to people as opposed to just using it internally, we became the vendors. It's funny because I'd like to state that it was some grand vision when we sat down and said, okay, when we're going to create our cloud infrastructure, we're going to go out there and start isolating these network resources and try to do it at a lower level than had been done before because of some of the problems for higher performance apps. But it really wasn't. We just basically had taken what we had already done before and built for our clients. There was a lot of software as a service clients and worked on ways to get that available as a truly API addressable function as opposed to just a tool that was used internally to the organization. But when you think about it, when we look back in retrospect, we weren't looking at network virtualization in terms of how we can implement a piece of technology. As always is the case, especially for vendors, you're looking at what problem were we solving for the end client. And the problem we were trying to solve for the clients at the time were most of our applications are still very transactionally intensive, meaning they're relational databases that have to talk to an application tier. Most software as a service still does a lot of transactionals back and forth, as opposed to a more cloud-specific application that can deal with eventual consistency and the like. We still had a lot of people using Oracle databases, MySQL databases with very high speed, very low latency connections to the application servers in order to complete their transactions. And we were trying to figure out how to be able to do that while still giving ourselves the flexibility of being able to do a truly cloud deployed network. And being data center guys, the first thing we always think about in a data center is, what would you do? You stick in a switch, and then you start putting VLANs on the switch, and you plug your different pieces in the different VLANs. And we extended that analogy into our environment. Again, not intentionally. It was just the way we thought of things, because data center guys always put switches in first before they put in the rest of the environments. And so that led us to all these kind of downstream. And as we get more into where you go to the physical layer, how much more now we can use through software virtualization that we couldn't do 4 years ago because it didn't have the stability or the capabilities and scale. But where we still believe we need to get down to kind of a more layer 2 type of isolation in order to keep, make sure that we're getting the performance that we need.
Great, thank you. Mark, a question for you. Is, in your business, you spend a lot of time around the WAN. Where are you seeing network virtualization be applicable across on, in the mobile network, in the service provider environment, in that telco environment?
Okay, so I want to go back to your earlier question about vendors versus users. So in the cellular network operator space, the large operators came to the same conclusion you did a few years ago. And they decided that the vendors were creating products that met the vendors' needs, not the users' needs. So they developed an organization called NGMN, Next Generation Mobile Networks. And the whole point of that organization is to make it clear what the real user requirements are. And the thing they're focusing on right now is what they call converged operations, which is bringing all this stuff together. The problem is that vendors want to differentiate their products. So we agree to a certain amount of standardization, but only a little bit, because we want to be able to differentiate. And then that leads to this problem, and we see it in many, many different guises, but it's the same problem. So I don't know if that's exactly the answer you wanted, but.
No, this is good. That was at least to one of the questions. But maybe the follow-on to that is, where do you start seeing the use cases for network virtualization, in the telco network?
So the problem in the telco network is, as I said, complexity and scale and volatility. So what we've been able to do is to provide an abstraction layer that abstracts all of this hardware and software differences, and then we provide an open API. And we're able to collect all of the operational data across the whole network, and what it ends up with is we can reduce the amount of capital you have to spend because they're over-provisioning their networks. We can reduce the amount of operating expense, and they have problems with time to market for new products and maintaining quality of service. And since we all use cell phones, you all know those problems. So that's where we see the business case there. In the enterprise, one of the things that we think is maybe the most challenging is moving an application from one cloud to another. And so if you just design your application to go on a particular public cloud provider, that cloud provider tries to lock you in. And of course, lock-in means higher margin, and of course, higher margin means higher cost. So as a user, you want to be able to go to the best service provider and the best cost and be able to move back and forth. But right now, it's very difficult to do that. So that's one of the other areas that we're focusing on.
Great, thanks. So, Shailesh, so you had mentioned about SDN and NFV in your opening statement. Where do you see the converging of SDN and NFV as it relates to the cloud infrastructure?
The way we look at it is, I think NFV is just a way to virtualize SDN. I think it's hard to think of one. At least we don't think of one independent of the other. I think in the first generation you had. Cloud was about fast access, low cost. I think now if you look at what companies are looking for when they want to go to a cloud infrastructure, they're looking for fundamentally, they want to have provisioned access to, low latency, authenticated services, whether it is, memcache, security, database, storage, whatever it is. So I think if you look at it from that perspective of why are people trying to move to the cloud? What is it really? I don't think it's just about cost anymore. Obviously, we started off with SDN, okay, everybody's familiar, you separate the control plane, the data plane. But I think the way we look at it is it's an extension. We don't think of it as one being separate from the other. And what it allows us to do is really decide where to put the right function at which layer in the network. And I think that is huge, right? Because at the end of the day, we talked about, you asked about use cases. I don't think, at least we don't see it so much as, this, whether it's SDN or NFV as an extension, whether it is, for one use case or the other. The way we look at it is I think that's been the problem historically is, we've tried to decentralize. We thought that was great, but it still created a lot of bottlenecks at different layers in the network. And now what we're allowing people to do is, if you want the kind of access, the kind of latency, the kind of scale out and scale up, which by the way, scale out I think is harder than scale up, figuring out how using these technologies can give access to those services to anybody is really how we look at it. So I don't think we think of specific use cases, and we just make it available as part of our network. And we think without, one can't work very effectively without the other. Of course, that wasn't the case a few years ago, but today we think of both of them as just, two sides of the same coin.
Yep.
I hate when panels where everybody agrees, but it's exactly right. Especially as you start thinking about the difficulties with scaling out and scaling up. So, 4 or 5 years ago, you had to have a big integrated stack. And again, for a large portion, the components of the architecture did not, a lot of the virtualization didn't scale effectively for large volumes of traffic. So when you got someone who was doing a high performance application, suddenly that was crashing the network layer across the board. And with, unfortunately, some of the underlying effects of doing that in a cloud environment and impacting multiple clients for the same areas. So you had to isolate those as much as possible and literally put many more resources in than you would probably necessarily want to sell each specific service. And one of the keys on cloud services, much to our surprise for those of us over the years who said that clients don't want to be nickeled and dimed, is we find that generally they do want to be nickeled and dimed, as long as they know what nickels and dimes are spending, right? As long as they can say, I want to identify this particular functionality and how am I going to pay for it. If I want to have a variety of different network services from SSL acceleration and termination to load balance and firewalls, and I can be comfortable if we break those all out into tenth of a penny an hour type of services. And so from a scale out perspective, we can now use some of the new virtualization to take those components and put them at as many places as possible, while still many times relying on a more traditional architecture for someone who's doing gigabytes of traffic and you want to give them a QoS experience. I believe eventually, when I say eventually, probably even now, you can get up to that gigabytes experience under the virtualization. We're a little more conservative, and so we'll probably do that in the next network iteration and not the current one. But it does allow you to do these kinds of services in a great scale-out fashion and really give each client exactly what they want without over-provisioning services that clients who don't need them won't be using.
If I can just take a minute to give an example. I mean, Treb's just comment got me thinking. I think a lot of vendors, a lot of companies, and customers, when they're in this, they look at, okay, what can I use this for? So they start with the use case in mind, or, can I provide it at a particular price? Can I do this for this particular use case? So Google Compute Engine, which is our infrastructure offering, right? Again, as I mentioned, everything we do, Andromeda, whether it's SDN and NFV on top of it or integrated with it, is just part of the stack. Now, I think recently we announced this, call it a feature, but basically, we were able to give folks 1 million QPS, right, took about 5 seconds to start, less than 2 minutes to reach steady state. 1 million QPS in less than 2 minutes to reach steady state, 4 or 5 seconds to ramp up at a cost of $10. Now, if we started with the approach of saying, okay, what use case can I use this for? I don't think we would have got there. Frankly, I couldn't think of many use cases that could probably use that effectively on a regular basis. How many of you run applications that require 1 million QPS? That's how many of you here plus 2 hands, right? Times 2 hands, not that many. But we didn't approach it from that perspective. We said, how far can we push this? And I think that's one of the things that I think is critical as you're evaluating, running, I know in the sessions before this, there was a lot of talk about public cloud, hybrid cloud, private clouds, etc. And I think it really comes down to what are you best at doing? If you've been put on the planet to offer the best shopping experience to a customer, or if you've been put on the planet to provide the best music experience to a customer, you probably aren't going to be the best at providing infrastructure services. You should get out of it and let that work go to somebody else. I'm not saying go to Google, go to anyone that can do it for the needs that you want. And I think there was some talk about chore versus core, et cetera, earlier. And I think that's how I would say folks should look at this. Whether it's SDN, NFV, or any other technologies, what is core to your business and what is not, find somebody who does it better. It's okay to admit it. There are people who do something better just like you do something better than others, than Google, for example.
No, this is great. Matter of fact, so we've got just a few minutes left, so I actually want to move to maybe just sort of a lightning sort of quick series of questions. So the first one is, I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this is that the view of the panel really is that network virtualization is not really about being for a particular use case or a particular product. But what it's really about is that it's a feature of the cloud infrastructure that's going out there, whether it's for mobile operators or telcos, or whether it's the data center. I'd love just to hear from each one of our panelists. Do you disagree or agree with that statement?
The first problem I have is understanding exactly what you said. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is being able to virtualize both the central site and the distributed networking environment is not application specific. It's a fundamental infrastructure, and the value cuts across all applications. If that's what you're saying, I absolutely agree with you. But just so we don't have a panel that fully agrees with everybody, there is a problem with NFV. The problem is everybody has a definition, but everybody's definition is different. So NFV is a really slippery word or acronym. It means very different things to different people. So be very careful when you use the NFV word or when somebody uses it with you. Make sure you understand exactly what they're talking about. Some people are talking about actually virtualizing the operation of the network. Other people are talking about virtualizing the switches and routers. Other people are talking about virtualizing the control functions that sit in a central site. And so there's at least 3 different definitions, and I think there's probably, combinations and permutations of those.
And this gets back to one of the earlier conversations on my lightning, which gets right on there. I don't think I've ever heard my guys even use the term. Now, I'm sure at some point, NFV, I'm sure at some point when you talk to the people and the engineers and we're working at, there may be some off-the-books discussion about are we going to do this? But mostly, whenever they're asked that, it's because they're asked to respond to somebody on my job going, are we using NFV or how is it impacting our organization, as opposed to an actual solution set for their client base. Same with SDN 5 years ago when you were asked about whether we were using that and the confusion with whether that included OpenFlow or was all-inclusive. They're solving problems that to give you the million QPS, to get the transactional latencies down to a certain part. And they look at effective solutions. And as groups like this come together, and I think we have one more question, so I'll leave it to the next one, come together, we tend to get hyper-focused on trying to categorize solutions into specific buckets in terms of how the deployments go. And so then I go out and say, I got to get a panel, give me some rundown so I can speak intelligently on this particular subject. And we're trying to categorize how we're doing this into that specific buckets. Why I think the end result is the clients, and this will be in the next part, don't care at all. And as a matter of fact, don't even want to hear it. They want to hear what they can do with it and how it can make their life easier and how fast they can get associated with it. Not, are you using NFV or SDN or those things, because a lot of that is now abstracted from them. I mean, they really don't see what's going on underneath the covers the way traditional IT deployments did before.
So Matt, I understand your question, and I agree with it.
Thank you.
I think, Mark, you were mentioning about, watch out for what it means from different people. And I think what was key to all the 3 dimensions you talked about was the word virtualization. So the way we look at it, I think, is NFV is just a way to virtualize SDN, and that's it. And to your point, people don't care whether, to some people you can go tell them, we're selling you a drill, we're selling you a drill bit, we're selling you the power cord, it's AC, DC, battery power, trigger, whatever. And that's where I think the conversation about whether are you using NFV, are you using SDN, some people just want a hole in the wall. So depending on your audience, you either tell them, hey, I can put this hole in the wall there, 100-pound painting, no problem. They don't care if you go in with a drill. They don't care if you have a person with a pointy finger that just sticks it in the wall. And so I think that's the way to look at it. At least that's how I look at it.
Great, thank you. Well, we're down to our last question, and this is one, given that we have a room full of entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs in the room, the question that we're going to ask is, what advice do each one of you have for, for the entrepreneurs in this room who are looking to participate in the cloud infrastructure ecosystem and are starting companies in this space? Where do you think they should go, and how do you think they should get started? Go ahead and start, Mark.
So I've been working in infrastructure my whole career in communications and processing. And so my first suggestion is, you've got a knowledge area, it is an area you've found that you work in. Stay within your area. I could go try to create the next music service or something, but it's not what I do. The second thing is, the way I look for opportunities is I look for bottlenecks. I try to see a bottleneck either that's here or that's coming, and then find a solution to the bottleneck.
Great, thank you. Treb.
So I'm going to get off tech altogether and talk about the client and the customer in this case. And this is the one thing we see, not only in us, but the people who use us in their success in the market. The people who, the revolution on SaaS and even more through now when we're seeing cloud infrastructure as a service is the way it's not as much, it's just as much the way it's sold as the technology that sells it. Mm-hmm. Meaning that we now have a relationship with clients that lasts 1 hour at a time, that is constantly evolving, that never runs out, that gives them exactly what they want, when they want it, for the amount they want it, and they're up and down and they're done. And why is that? It's because we have a generation of users who coming into the workforce who have spent their entire life on this technology, who've been buying it. My old joke is the average person checks their mobile phone 150 times a day. My daughter only checks it once a day, about 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Probably about 2 a.m., but I just don't see her after 9 p.m. So, and she's a 16-year-old cheerleader. She's been doing and interacting with this technology her entire life. We're not selling to guys like me who are the treasurer of the computer club. We're selling to people who buy and use technology. Yeah, they say I wasn't even the king of the dorks. I was the treasurer of the dorks.
I don't think anyone knows what the treasurer is anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I was the treasurer of the geeks. And these people buy this technology in a completely different way. And so much I come in and someone says, I've got this great complicated solution for solving your NFV problem or this particular area. And they forget that the buyer here is saying, I can buy network services from somebody for a fraction of a cent, see if it works, see if it fixes my problem. I don't even have to understand why it fixes my problem. Just see if it fixes my problem, have it going, and if that doesn't work, try something else out. And if you're not getting that solution out to your clients the same way, if you're not presenting the same way, you're going to get passed over. Guys like me will look at it. Anybody under the age of 30, 35 is going to just skip over to the next guy where he can figure out what they can get from you right away and start using it right away. You got to think about how you're going to market and look a lot different about who your new client is.
So specifically from an entrepreneur perspective, I think, I love Google because it does feel like a startup, and I say this with all honesty. I think for entrepreneurs, a couple of things. One is I am reminded of the Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, but get up 8 times. I think that's something that entrepreneurs have to learn how to do every day. In your case, it may not be 7 and 8, it may be 50 and 51. But, and I think I see a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups that have a technology in mind and are looking for the problem to solve. I think you all see this as well a lot. And I think it needs to be the other way around. Figure out a problem that is so big that don't try to look at addressable market. What if your addressable market was 7.5 billion people? Better still, what if your addressable market was 14 billion eyes? That's how we looked at the market when we came up with contact lenses that can give you an early signal for diabetes by analyzing human tears, right? That's how you look at the market, you look at a problem that is so big that it almost looks and sounds impossible to solve. Again, it's easier said than done, I understand that. But I think that's where the real delta is going to be made. Find problems that are so difficult to solve. Figure out a couple of pieces of technology that exist which make it reasonably logical that you could solve the problem or somebody could solve the problem. and then try to figure out, the best way to go at it with some of the points that were mentioned. I will disagree with Mark. For someone to disagree on the panel is, I am not sure I agree with the fact that you should stick to what you know best. I don't think Google knows best how to build self-driving cars. I don't think Google knows best how to create contact lenses or put up internet balloons that can give connectivity to a global audience. I don't think your customers know best either. As Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they needed, they would have said faster horses. I'm not so sure that you need to stick to what you do best. Most entrepreneurs may not know what they do best, but they have a vision and a passion and a problem they want to solve and feel that they've been put on the planet to solve it. I think that's the advice I would give to entrepreneurs. If you're going to stick to what you know best, you might create a car that gives you 5% better gas mileage. You will not be able to create a car that drives itself.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And